Alright, so today Ubi dropped patch 2.20.2, and with it we've gotten a whole lot of damage adjustments as well as a nerf to Warmonger's Feats that somehow roped in Nush's tier 4, and a few changes to stamina and attacks that deal stamina damage. There's a whole lot in the notes today, and if I went over every single change, this video would probably be an hour long, so I'm only going to go over a few things that caught my eye as I went through them, and leave a link to the notes somewhere down below, probably in a pinned comment, so that you can read everything for yourself. Now, as always, if you do visit the channel regularly, I'd really appreciate it if you sub to the channel, as it really helps me out. Now let's not waste any more time and get right into it. Alright, really quick, there's another event going on in For Honor at the moment. It's not a new one, instead it's another throwback event. This event is from the Right of Champions event that went down in Season 6. With it comes another round of Carousel of Death, and of course a bunch of things you can grind for. My favorite part about this event is that the Radiance effect is back after all of this time. I've wanted this effect for years now on a few heroes, as it's one of my favorites, and it released during a time where I really didn't play the game that much because of what was going on, and now you can earn it for the Wu Lin, the Year 3 heroes, and Warmonger as well, I believe, or you can just buy it in the shop. Now for the patch, as I said, there's a bit going on in this one. First up, let's talk about Warmonger's Feats. The first thing has to do with corruption itself, meaning that Nush's tier 4, Infection, is being affected by this as well. So corruption is no longer triggered by having soldiers from your team in the area of effect. I think we all knew this one was coming. This should make playing 4s less frustrating when fighting against a Warmonger. As for Corruption Blade, the tier 1 feat itself, they've decreased the active time before going into cooldown without hitting a target to 15 seconds. So this means that Warmonger only has 15 seconds to land an attack after they apply the corruption to their blade instead of 20. And they've increased the cooldown of the feat to 75 seconds instead of 60. As for Corruption Blast, the tier 4, they've increased the cooldown to 180 seconds from 150 seconds. So we saw all of these changes coming. There isn't really anything surprising here. I guess we'll just have to wait and see where this goes from here. It'll still have a big impact on fights itself, and it's still a tier 1 that demands your attention, but at least we don't have to be on our toes and be ready to run away from clearing minions when you see a Warmonger coming your way anymore. I thought maybe we'd see a damage nerf and an AoE nerf on top of these, but we did not. So again, we'll just have to wait and see how this plays out. I do know, however, that the changes we see here are pretty good. Now on to stamina really fast. Light attacks now cost 9 stamina instead of 12, with combo lights requiring 6 stamina instead of 12. Again, combo lights are the guaranteed lights that some attacks have, like Orochi's top light, Warden's side lights, or Shaolin's side lights. They've also confirmed that Berserker's lights after heavy feints cost 6 stamina instead of 9 or 12, so that they can finally breathe again for using the character as intended. They've also messed around with attacks that deal stamina damage themselves, like Valkyrie's sidelight finishers and Gladiator's parry punish or Tiandi's kick. So they changed the stamina drain of all of those attacks to drain 30 stamina instead of whatever they did before. So Valkyrie's crazy 80 stamina damage sidelight finishers will now only do 30 stamina damage. Warlord and Gladiator's parry punishes will now do 30 stamina damage instead of 60, so on and so on. Jang Jun's choke wasn't mentioned here, so he'll still be able to take people out of stamina with that pretty easily if they're already low. So hopefully they get around to addressing that, or maybe they'll leave it as is. Now before I move on to damage, really quick, Shigoki also received a change everyone should feel. His light attacks now have 833 milliseconds of recovery on hit and 733 milliseconds of recovery on block. This basically means that he won't be frame advantaged anymore after throwing just a light attack. I saw a few people concerned about this, and I'm surprised that Ubi did something so quickly. Now that we have Shigoki and recovery in the same sentence, maybe we could look at Demon's Embrace recoveries on whiff, so that you can't roll away from him and hit him in the back of the head with a top heavy while he tries to stand back up. Alright, finally, damage adjustments. So damage has essentially been lowered across the board on heavy attacks. We've seen some zone attacks bumped up a bit, and deflects have been bumped up a bit as well. But Most of what you'll be reading on this list has to do with heavy attacks being brought down in some way. Ubi left a comment here saying, "We have adjusted the damage for multiple attacks. On average, heavy attacks deal less damage and light attacks remain mostly the same, but there are some exceptions. The new damage values are closer to, but not identical, to Testing Grounds Week 2. We looked at community feedback and our own internal feedback and examined every attack in regard to its utility and properties and rebalanced their damage accordingly. This was done to ensure that fights last a bit longer, punishes are less damaging, and players have more time to anticipate what their opponents do. We have also raised zone attack damage for the heroes that rely on them as their sole guard break punish." I like that statement that they left. They brought up basically the exact things we talked about when everything went down, including going through every attack and looking at those, not just in terms of how much damage they do, but the attributes of the attacks themselves. You know, whether or not they're armored, or can they be followed up with bleed, or is it a guard break punish, you know, things like that. Now, as I said, I won't go through everything here, but a lot of it looks pretty good. Fights are certainly going to last longer, as there are a lot of number changes that aren't just small changes to damage. There are some pretty notable changes here, and I can't say much because I haven't played yet and haven't gotten to feel things out for myself, but I'm glad to see things like Bulwark Slash being brought down to 27 damage instead of 35. Centurion's Eagle's Talon does 30 damage instead of 40. His zone attack strikes now deal 12 instead of 8. Highlander's Offensive Stance Heavies deal 30 damage instead of 37. Kensei's Top Heavy Finisher deals 34 damage instead of 48. Blind Justice does, 30 damage overall now. I'm surprised to see some health swing attacks being changed as well. Shaman's Bite now does 35 damage and heals her for 15 for a health swing of 50 instead of 60. And Shigoki's Demon's Embrace, the hug, does 22 damage and heals for 18 for a health swing of 40 rather than 45. While there's plenty of good, there are also still a few values that I think should be looked at again. The first hero that comes to mind is Peacekeeper. The first time we talked about Peacekeeper after the Core Combat update went live, I talked about how she'd have a tough time getting to use her finishers because of her 5 damage side dodge heavies, being too low. We know that bleed will bring the overall damage up, but finishing opponents with heavies is an important thing for all heroes, as taking someone out of the fight for an extra few seconds is valuable, and getting that extra health is valuable as well. Well, now we'll be having that exact same conversation again, because her regular heavy damage has been dropped again. So her opener top heavy will deal 16 damage instead of 21, and her opener side heavies will only deal a measly 13 damage. 13! With her heavy finishers dealing 20 base damage instead of 24, and her dashing thrust dealing 8 damage instead of 18. This obviously isn't a hit piece towards just PK like some people are saying. Everyone got their damage nerfed, but I think it's time that Ubi looks at bleed damage and Peacekeeper and somehow figure out a way to up her base damage and have bleed damage take a hit. Bleed is a useful tool, yes, but it can still be negated by thick blood and healing. I'd be happy if Ubi decided to have bleed do less damage itself overall and make it more like a status, and keep the duration of the bleed the same so that she can still, have it be beneficial toward her, and up the damage on her base attack itself so that Peacekeeper can get the benefit of doing damage more quickly and be able to get more finishers out of it. I remember a time when PK was buffed to pull off more finishers, but at this moment, it'll be tougher than before. Another hero, Nobu, seemed to take a bit of a blow now that her chain lights deal 7 damage instead of 13, making hidden stance deal less damage. I believe this is because of Way of the Shark and bleed, of course. Conk's Flail Uppercut does 20 damage now instead of 15, which is better. I thought it would be a little higher though. And his zone attack still doesn't do much damage. It does 8 for the first strike and 4 for each following strike. Just things like that. Overall though, on paper, besides for a few things, there are a lot of good things in this patch. The lower damage numbers were sort of needed if attacks were going to land more often so that we don't die so quickly, but now we've just got to take some time to play the game and see how everything feels. We've gotten a few updates in a row now, so Now I wonder what's next. September is rolling around, which is crazy to think about, so hopefully we'll get some more info soon. Anyways, that's all I've got for this video. I'm going to try and play For Honor, but my game keeps crashing every time I boot it up, so I've got to figure that out. Before you guys head out, feel free to check the links down below for the patch notes and a link to my Twitter so you can check that out. I'm trying to reach 1,000 followers and I'm pretty close. As always, I do want to know what you guys think, so be sure to talk to me down in the comments about anything we talked about in this video. And as always, if you like the video, feel free to leave a like and sub if you're new. And I will talk to you guys in the next video.